Good morning, Mr. Lee.
What are you doing today, Counselor?
Okay, Mr. Lee.
I'm starting my ad this week on those
We are live. The following program is brought to you by Lee, Cosell and Crowley, Indiana's local, state, and Midwest law firm for over 50 years. And now to our host, Nathaniel Lee.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us again today. I'm happy to report that the COVID numbers is not bad. And I have two superstar panelists to join me today. Attorney Milton, the famous lawyer from LA, who led the revolution in terms of recording of police misconduct in the Rodney King case. And a crack-shot legal analyst, masters in tax, cybersecurity expert, and crack research analyst, Attorney Vanita Banks. I'm so blessed to have such outstanding lawyers to join me today. But to start off, there has been a number of critical cases that hit the news this week. And but the most jarring one I thought that was significant has been the ongoing criminal investigation of the fake electors in Georgia. Let me tell you why that's important. In Georgia, as part of the ruse to steal the election, to overturn democracy, there was 16 fake electors certified, and now they're being investigated. It's kind of bizarre that there was a unified effort in several states to have the election overthrown by the Electoral College. Now, personally, I feel that the Electoral College may have outlived its usefulness because the majority vote should prevail. And so this Electoral College thing may have made a lot of sense maybe a couple hundred years ago, but today it should be the will of the people. It should be straight democratic democracy vote, but that's not what we're dealing with. Because particularly in light of the fact that we have people that think that you're going to overthrow the federal government by nominating and selecting people after you lost the election. So I just thought that that's an interesting case to follow, and I'll be reporting on it to see what happens. Because if we allow fake electors to go and vote to elect a fake president, that's just the end of our democracy as we know it. Having said that, Attorney Grimes, you were concerned about some officers got shot, you said, in Georgia?
Oh, yeah, a friend of mine sent me a video of a white gentleman, middle-aged white gentleman in orange outfit similar to the color I have on here, which is the, I just thought about it being the jail color. But anyway, and he was in custody, and the note was he's allowed to speak to his family. He has a lawyer, and he was being charged with the killing of 2 white police officers. There's no fanfare about it, no major news about it. It's been passed over. It happened 2 days ago, I think, in Cobb County, Georgia, right outside of Atlanta. And the comments were, "Wow, do the white Republicans really care about blue, about police officers, or they only care when it involves an occurrence with an African American?" Because they sure didn't pay any attention to this killing of 2 white police officers by a white man. It kind of supports the belief that there is a desire to make us look bad, to create fear of Black people, and that's why they highly publicize any confrontation or altercation by Black men and police officers, as opposed to when the same thing happens with white men and police officers. Do you get my drift?
I do. And I know that Attorney Banks live in Chicago, and from my perspective, that's like a police hellhouse there, because I get it from both sides, and I fully understand the depth of what you're referring to. And that's tragic thing. First of all, I'm sure you join me in the idea that the killing of human being lives, whether it's civilian, police officer, black, white, is a terrible thing. It's a terrible
Right.
tragedy. And I think that one of the things that bothers me is that we have these guns where we have lawful gun owners, we have criminals with guns. So the question is, in America, who's like 3% of world population, but private gun ownership over 50%, should we take a closer look at this so-called veiled Second Amendment that never really stood for the idea that we should have over half the guns in the world by private ownership? So I think, Milton, one of the problems we're dealing with is that we have a series of mental illness issues. We have an out of control country that guns, every time something happens, the sales of guns increase. And so now in our state, for example, we passed a law that took effect on July 1st, where everybody now can own a gun. It's open carry. You don't need a permit. They have to do a background. The only exception, if you're a convicted felon, you can't lawfully own a gun. But the problem is, what about people with mental disease and illness? And how will they know? And so the problem is, Milton, I believe that we just have too many guns. I don't know what Attorney Bank thinks about that.
Well, I think absolutely that the United States has too many guns, and that this doesn't happen in other countries. And I think that's one of the big problems. And then also, as you stated, Attorney Lee, there is a significant problem with mental illness in this country as well. And that's only been exacerbated by, the last over 2 years that we've been living in a pandemic. And back to Attorney Grimes' point, I wanted to ask you a question, Attorney Grimes. Was this particular shooter, was he peacefully apprehended?
He is as live as you and I are this moment, not a scratch on his body. Do you get my point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we have seen that historic inequitable application of force by law enforcement agencies across this nation. It's particularly stark contrast.
I don't know how the apprehension was obtained. I don't know the encounter or anything. I do know the result is kind of astonishing that a person is unscratched, unscathed after killing 2 white police officers. Again, we shake our head because we don't see that when a Black person is involved with law enforcement.
That's absolutely right. And there have been so many examples of that. The Highland Park shooter was another example of that. And we saw, on national news how he was apprehended. And that example of how the police, law enforcement handled that situation was held as a model for how it should be done. But Black men and men of color don't get that same type of treatment.
I just saw in my mind this kid running from the car and getting shot at 90 sometimes and getting hit 60 times.
Right.
And he didn't have a gun on him, Nate.
Oh,
guys, shit.
Well, one of my concerns is that when these tragic events happen, we see the political pundits, they take sides. And but the taking of a life is just terrible. And my whole problem, though, is that is in my investigation of a lot of these cases over the years, particularly police misconduct, because we represent a lot of police officers also. My law firm, we represented over 400 officers back in the day. We did the class action with the city. We did represent the state police. And so we represent a lot of officers. But one of the things that has occurred, Milton, in terms of the training over the years, there's been a fundamental shift. And so what I discovered is that at the academy, they were started being trained to defend themselves in shooting incidents. And the magic word that they use, I was in fear of my life.
Right.
I was in fear of my safety. I was in fear of my partner's safety. And that has invoked this crazy civil defense qualified immunity that was judicially created. And it's an ironclad now. It's now suffocating these type of cases in order to seek justice. So they say to look into the eyes of what the police officer did or didn't do, and then we will judge based on what he says. It's a terrible tragedy. So even though we have contradictory evidence, it's been difficult. It's been difficult to obtain justice in those type instances. So you're rightly concerned that when these gentlemen were arrested, but the most glaring case, I thought, was the case in South Carolina, Counselor, where the guy goes into a church, Mother Emanuel, and just starts shooting everybody. And so when they arrest the suspect, he said, I'm hungry. So they went to Burger King, gave him a waffle, fries, and a strawberry shake. And that was just so ridiculous. And the government later paid a settlement based on the fact that they knew that this kid should not have gotten a weapon in the first place, and they signed off apparently. So I was happy to hear that there was at least some monetary relief, but that was a first in American history. I think that was the first time I've seen the government pay for misconduct.
Let me make the last thing I will say on this point, and to follow up with what you said about them being trained to say I was in fear for my life.
Mhm.
It is the 137 Shots docudrama in Cleveland, Ohio, 10 years ago, where the couple was in a car and it passed by a police station and the car backfired. And one officer said, they shot at us. And another officer said, no, that was a backfire, fool. And there was a pursuit after that car. And it ended up with, according to the news and according to a lot of the video tapes they had, there was a parade of police cars, 60-some police cars in a 35-mile-an-hour chase of this man and woman in a car with no weapon in the car. He stops in a school parking lot and the officers surround his car and they shoot 137 times with one officer jumping on the hood of his car and emptying his gun, reloading and emptying it again, shooting 40 times through the windshield at this black man and black woman, killing both of them. And they charged him with murder. Believe it or not, he had a court trial. And he cried to the judge and told him he was scared and he was in fear for his life. That's why he jumped up on the hood of the car and shot that many times. And the judge found him not guilty. You can see it. It's on Netflix. It's called 137 Shots. It's a documentary. So those magic words, that phrase, those magic words, got him a not guilty.
Attorney Lee, and of course, Attorney Grimes, both experts on the doctrine of qualified immunity. Attorney Lee, you had a case that you appealed for certiorari to the Supreme Court. Could you speak on some of the arguments that can be made as demonstrated in the specific litigation that I'm referencing?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. First of all, the idea of qualified immunity, when the history of our country, is not a statute, it's not a state law, it was a judicial fiat back in the 80s. So when I first started litigating these cases, I didn't have to deal with qualified immunity. In law school, what I did is I worked for the Institute of Government, And so for a year and a half, I researched every 1983 case in the country in the federal court. So it was a manual that they did, and I did the notes for all the 1983 cases. And so when I started practicing law, that was an area which I knew a lot about because I read all the cases. But so what happened is, though, when I first started litigating these cases during the trial, the qualified immunity defense was laughable. We would get it knocked out and go into trial and get big verdicts and move forward. And then as the political composition of the court changed over the years, the qualified immunity defense grew bigger teeth. It's almost like an elephant now. Maybe it started off as a mice, but now it's a big elephant in terms of defense. And so in my cases, in all these cases, they're doing two things. One, they're using qualified immunity. And number two, they're limited the scope of the cases that you can litigate based upon statutory interpretation. So now they're saying in a lot of these cases, if a statute doesn't give you a specific right to pursue a remedy, ergo, you're out of court. So in terms of the qualified immunity defense, basically it's a difficult standard to overcome now. What the officers have been trained in the academy, and I'm not guessing about this, we represented Compton. I had a video. I had the video recording of them teaching this in the academy. You know what I'm saying? Okay, if you're involved in this, and here's how you defend yourself. And I'm thinking, so you're telling the officer that you could have a bad shooting and simply say, I was in fear of my life, and that would exonerate you. Now, the case that Attorney Grimes referenced is something that the Justice Department should reopen, because in these type cases on murder, there's no statute of limitation. So based on the physical evidence of him testifying at trial, I think that's something that we should turn over to Merrick Garland, like right away, and make sure that the officer justice is pursued, because I don't think that that should have ended that way. You know, it was a weird case, and I followed some of that case, Attorney Grimes, in terms of how he did that. Now, back to the qualified immunity. The doctrine is designed to protect the officer by simply, based on his standard, what a reasonable officer would believe or say. And unfortunately, the court has taken a draconian view on this to almost believe what the officers say, unless you have video evidence to show otherwise. Now, in the Day case, we actually had video evidence to prove what we were saying. And we won at the district court level in the Court of Appeal with Amy Barrett, who was a new judge, took the court. And one of her first decisions on the Court of Appeals on the Seventh Circuit was to throw out our case right before trial, in one case in which we were going to get a record verdict. And then she's elevated to the U.S. Supreme Court. When she's elevated to the Supreme Court, the argument we took in the case before the Supreme Court, we took a dissenting opinion from Justice Thomas. So we took the most conservative justice who agreed with our position on this legal issue and rewrote his opinion in our brief. So that at the time was a brilliant strategy. So we figured at worst, we'll have a 5-4 decision because Thomas' own brief is what we rewrote, right? Well, so they decided they were going to hear our case and do our brief. And then Barrett took the court. And the first thing she did within 35 days was recused herself from hearing or participating in our case. After she recused herself, then the court threw our case out. Tragic ending. And so, so the point is that even when we had a meritorious claim to proceed to win the case with visual proof, we had scientific proof, we had video evidence, we had medical proof, we had testimonial evidence to prove a solid case, and the court said qualified immunity is sufficient. Tragic ending. Yeah.
Going back to this fake election issue that you raised earlier, Attorney Lee, in Georgia, which is being investigated by the authorities both the Georgia Bureau of Investigations and potentially, if not already, the national FBI, because there's questions as to whether or not there have been violations of federal cybersecurity law. And my understanding is that GOP election officials, including the former chairman of the party in Georgia, she's the former chairwoman, and another person, they signed on to a false slate of electors in Georgia, and then they enabled a forensic company to access the elections office. And they've got surveillance video where they have breached Georgia's election security by extracting voting data from voting machines. And so, as Attorney Lee stated, I mean, these potential violations strike at the very heart of our democracy and the integrity of our voting process. And it's also possible that they violated the computer, that it's a computer trespass violation, because under Georgia law, anyone that knowingly uses a computer without authority with the intent to delete, obstruct, alter, or damage a computer program or data, that's a felony offense, which is punishable up to 15 years in prison. And this type of activity did not only take place in Georgia, it's one of several counties across the country where Trump linked forensic experts. The entity in Georgia was paid $26,000 to conduct whatever they did at the Georgia office, but similar actions were taken in counties across the nation. And it's possible that there was a breach of voting systems in multiple counties, including in Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Colorado. You know, all were the, what do we call them, the swing states?
Yes.
And are also states that are going to be very pivotal in our midterm elections coming up as well. So this is very, very dangerous.
That's an excellent discussion on this. And I don't think that people realize the severe threat that our democracy is facing. And now this was documented by NBC News in a video that Attorney Banks was talking about. The video was obtained that shows the chairwoman of the Coffee County GOP escorting the cyber people into the office the same day as the data breach occurred under investigation by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Tragic set of events. So we have the chairwoman of the Republican Party in that county taking data breacher, and coincidentally, the breaches occurred. So that's under criminal investigation. We're not taking a position whether or not they committed a crime, but the evidence shows that they entered the building. They did not have evidence, direct evidence that they published yet to show that they actually committed this particular crime, but it sure looked like they're leaning that way. And so the point of this is that we have an election on a regular basis, And the issue, I think, is that how do we protect democracy? You know, democracy is hanging in the balance as we go forward. And I don't think most people realize this constitution that we're under, that this fragile democracy almost ended on January 6th of 2021. Fortunately, it held, but now we see that there's been supplemental searches and search warrants and criminal investigation is never ended. It's exhausting, Attorney Grant. It's exhausting every day. You know, you have to hear something on the news about the former president. It's exhausting about these criminal investigations. It's hard to keep track of them anymore. They're going on everywhere. New York, Georgia, Florida. I mean, Arizona. I mean, it's just out of control.
Well, Nate, as you and Vanita were talking, it brought to mind a movie I saw sometimes, a few years ago, The Free State of Jones, where part of it was, deals with slavery and the Civil War, but it was the end of the war and the emancipation of slaves, and Black man was voting. And in the southern county, there was an attempt to keep them from entering the voting booth, you know, where they would vote. And they fought against that, and they won that little scrimmage, and they vote. And their votes were put in a jar. You could physically see the votes dropped in a jar. And the white folks in another line over here voting the opposite party. I think Republicans and the Blacks were voting Democrat, or vice versa, I think it was. But anyway, at the end of the day, you saw the jar that the Black folks was putting their votes in was full. And the other jar was about, just the bottom was covered. So you knew we had won. But the count was like 99 to 22. It was reversed, like we didn't have enough votes. So the point I'm making is, I think it was Lenin, one of the Russian leaders at some point, say it's not who vote that counts, it's he who count the votes that counts. And that's what we're dealing with here, is the counting of the votes. And they damn near don't have to worry about who's voting and how many votes there are, if they have the ability to manipulate the result. And that's what you're simply talking about, I think, is that that's what's happening here. And that's the scary part of this. You're gonna have a government run by people who were not in the favor of the public, but who control the election machinery. And that's scary. That's scary as hell.
Well, terrible situation.
What are we gonna do, Ms. Banks?
Well, as I was hearing you speak, and you mentioned what we've seen over the last several years is individuals quietly being elected in state houses all over the country, and they don't represent the will of the people in those states. And we're seeing this in large visibility now with respect to the aftermath of the Dobbs decision, right? And we can use Indiana as an example of that. And in fact, Attorney Lee, I understand that recently there was a lawsuit filed challenging the new abortion law in Indiana. What's happening? What's happening with that?
Well, Indiana, that's a very good question. Indiana, as you know, after the Dobbs decision dealt with Dobbs versus Jackson Women Health Organization, of course, that council referring to, is a Supreme Court landmark decision that was initially leaked by someone and led to internal investigation. But the net effect is the Dobbs decision determined that Roe versus Wade, the 1973 lawsuit by Planned Parenthood, was illegal, that abortion now became illegal under that particular case in Mississippi. But after the Dobbs decision, the Indiana legislature had a special session, and they adopted an abortion law back in July that basically says that abortion in Indiana became illegal. And but the bill was highly controversial because one version of it said that even rape, incest, or otherwise, you still could not have an abortion. And they modified it slightly, but it's still a horrific bill. And so what is happening is that there's going to be some litigation on this issue. However, the problem that we're faced, though, is that we have a Seventh Circuit Court that missing a couple key judges that the Trump administration appointed some really conservative judges. And we have a U.S. Supreme Court whereby the radical right got 6 judges now. So I'm not sure, counsel, as to how successful we're going to be, given the fact that the higher courts have basically taken a strong lead against abortion. I'm not sure how successful that's going to be. And my thought process is that I'll track it and get a report next week and see whether or not they looked at a state remedy. Our state constitution actually provides broader protection, and I'll see whether or not they pursue the state remedy. The federal remedy, I think, is a dead end, in my opinion. I don't think I would take on that case, litigate. Although, and my third concern is sometimes, Milton, as you know, you can litigate some cases that you have a bright idea can make the bad decision even worse. And with this composition of court, because remember, in the concurrent opinion, the longest serving justice on the Supreme Court is Clarence Thomas. So he went further in Dobbs than anyone else. He suggested that maybe we need to look at what this same-sex marriage, and things like that. He went beyond what the opinion called for. And so at this point in time, as a litigator, I'd be afraid to take the subject on right now, given the current judicial makeup of the courts.
Well, of course, democracy is on the ballot this November, and it's very critically important that every citizen in our nation exercise our fundamental right to vote. We've seen 27 states have at least one abortion ban on their books. A woman's reproductive rights and the right to make a choice about her own body is very much on the ballot. Healthcare is on the ballot this fall. And, with these states where I've mentioned that we have leaders in office who actually brag about being able to do whatever they want unchecked, due to redistricting and gerrymandering, in many states. And so we have to be very careful. There is no intention on the part of some of these legislators for citizens to vote, right? And so that is the aim and the goal, to restrict voting rights so they can continue to rule, unchecked. And so it's critically important that between now and election day, that the current Biden administration actually tell the story of how President Biden is making good on or has met many of the campaign promises that he made as he was running for office. We have most recently, the Inflation Reduction Act, and we need people out there who are stating the benefits of that act to African Americans and communities of color. The largest investment ever in climate change in U.S. history, lower cost of healthcare and prescription drugs. And Attorney Lee, you spoke on an earlier show about the cost of insulin being capped at $35 for seniors, closing, the gap of many corporations and individuals in this country don't pay any taxes at all. And we have to continue to address the misinformation that, and we have to stress the truth that if you make less than $400,000 a year, that you will not suffer an increase in taxes.
Well, that's an excellent point, Attorney Banks. And one thing I need to echo that you said at the beginning about this abortion, we've seen some significant successes in other states. Kansas, of course, they put on the ballot. And this week, a couple of days ago, the Michigan Supreme Court, in a 5-2 decision, will allow the abortion ban problem to be placed on the ballot. And in the history of Michigan, it got more signatures to put something on the ballot than ever before. So the voters in the state of Michigan now, particularly young voters, have a reason now, additional reason to go to the poll and vote. And that was something that scared a lot of politicians, because now all of a sudden you got the young folks that are interested in something that affect them, that this abortion ban. So I think that from a political standpoint, I think that this issue of abortion would affect everybody. It doesn't just affect women. When the child is born, it an equal obligation to financial support it on the guy, and then you talk about the cost of college and stuff like that. So every child born, that's a significant financial obligation, coupled with daycare. There's a shortage of daycare. There's just a whole bunch of things that affect both parties, not just the woman in terms of this abortion debate. It's a decision that should be made by the woman with her family or doctors and things like that. That's the way it should be. And but the government should not take a role in abrogating the rights of women. We've seen this once before. I think people, Milton, don't realize the history. Women weren't given the right to vote in our country until 1921? I think that was the passage of that 21st Amendment. It was like, so we're only talking, 101 years? And now they're going to start taking the rights back, and if they take away women's rights, who's next?
Absolutely. And we also saw this week a South Carolina female representative speak out against the ban on abortion in her state. And what we're seeing is that while some people did approve of the Dobbs decision, they're horrified now as the intended and or unintended consequences are being, made known, to the public. For example, in Louisiana, a woman is being required to carry a baby with no skull to term or leave the state in order to seek an abortion. In Texas, a woman was told as she was beginning to experience miscarriage to go home and come back when there was enough blood to fill a diaper.
Whoa.
So these are the kinds of horrendous consequences that we're seeing as a result of this decision. we're seeing, you know, teenagers potentially die if they cannot, you know, terminate, you know, a pregnancy that is not viable. We saw the example of the 14-year-old girl in Indiana, for example. And so it is unacceptable that in potentially 25 states, a woman can seek reproductive health care, and in the other 25 states, she can't. And of course, the wealthy and affluent people, they will continue to have the freedom over choices made about their reproductive rights. And it's poor women and people of color, women of color, that will sustain the biggest inequitable consequences from this decision. And abortions will continue to occur. They will just not be done in safe settings. And so we saw, as you know, there has been an outcry since that decision, and it is very possible that the Dobbs decision may be a large factor in our saving democracy in this upcoming midterm election. What do you think?
Milton?
This is scary. This is a scary picture. I'm reading this book now, The 13 Clocks, talking about the Revolutionary War and how the Common Cause, initiated by Jefferson and those men of that time, the Common Cause to scare the colonies into joining together to fight England, was a lie. They created the fear of the slaves rebelling and killing their masters and raping and killing the women and the children and taking over the property. They created a fear of the red man killing the settlers in the back country and drinking their blood and mutilating their bodies. And these men put all of that in the press, knowing it was a lie, but it brought the colonies together. And again, we're dealing with this society being fear motivated by Trump and his like, with immigrants coming into this country and taking over, and they have to assert themselves and reclaiming this country and making America great again because of this fear they've created again, because they don't want to lose this power that they have. That's what I think. So we're in a war. We're in a war. It really is.
Well, my concern, though, is that despite all these critical issues that are facing our city, our state, our country, we have too many people that are sitting on the sidelines. I heard Attorney Banks' passionate overview of the accomplishment of the current administration, but there was one thing that I need to add to what she had said that I think is more significant than anything else. When President Biden took office, the country was still in the worst pandemic in American history. The worst pandemic. We had a $1 trillion type bill passed to pay for medical supplies to get rid of this awful disease process. Every day for a year and a half, we saw our friends, neighbors, relatives dying. We saw morgues so full, overbooked to capacity. We saw coroner's office getting dozens of refrigerated containers to hold all these bodies. It was a terrible American tragedy, unspeakable in terms of the amount of carnage and human suffering. And now we have the COVID long haul. But the president came in, did a plan, a brilliant plan. They distribute the vaccination, medication. Whoever had a cure, the government got bipartisan bill, they passed it, and they provided the necessary medical supplies to everybody in the United States. We had enough medical supplies vaccination to cover everybody in the country 3 times. So I thought that was a remarkable feat because now we're able to walk around without a mask. We're able to ride on planes without masks. But I still think you should, because I think the disease process is not going away anytime soon. But the point I'm making is that it's an extraordinary feat by a very competent administration. Remember, we forgot something very important. The last president came on TV, real time, and suggested that you could cure the disease process by injecting yourself with what? Bleach. And I think that most people, there were so many crazy things going on, it got crazier and crazier. But some of the things that, hydrochloroquine and things like that, every day they came up with these ghost cures, and all of a sudden you realize they were just a bunch of idiots. And it caused more people to die. They did not take the threat to this pandemic serious. They said initially that it'd be gone in a few months, and it got worse and worse, shut down the whole country. There were talks about having the military establish martial law. So we'd have been like a third world country having tanks and military men. I mean, this whole thing was crazy. And so we're back to a much more sane country now. And I think that's one of the biggest things that often get overlooked.
And then we also have to remember, this goes back, 2 years at the onset of the, well, not the actual onset, but when the Biden administration commenced, remember the American Rescue Act that put actual dollars in American citizens' pockets. We've seen the largest creation of jobs. When we look at the job report, we have had the first, and it's a good start, gun control legislation in 30 years. Legislation passed to provide health benefits for, our veterans who have served valiantly and who have been injured in, prior wars. So we have to really tell the story. Gas prices are coming down. We see them steadily coming down, of course. And so we have to really ensure that you mentioned, Attorney Lee, that there are many people sitting on the sidelines. We have to make sure that we are all surrogates in telling the story in our neighborhood regarding, the positive changes that have been made in a very, very short period of time. I don't know with respect to, prior pandemics, but I don't have any recollection of any administration providing, free vaccinations and boosters for everybody in the country. Are you attorneys, or providing home tests for every, citizen, in the nation? I'm just not aware of any other administration taking that type of leadership.
During my lifetime, it hasn't happened,
That's what I was thinking as well, not during my lifetime.
Well, I'm a little younger than both of you, and I don't recall.
The idea historically of the vaccination, I think the first time I studied that was like around 1905. Mm-hmm. And the way they did is that they would stick this thing in your arm and they would stick the actual virus. And that's how the vaccination process kind of started in America. So it had a long history. And but I did a jury trial on this issue. It was a fascinating jury trial that we had the scientists explain how they determined what vaccination to use, right? And so what they would do is that they would look at the 20 likely viruses to hit the country, and they would make a vaccine for the top 3. So when you would take your flu shot, it was based on a scientific evaluation, what would be the top 3. Now we saw that didn't always work, because in 2012, we saw that the bird flu hit the country, and we had like about 70 million people. That year, they missed the target, right? But the point is that we didn't have people dying. We had a few people died, but not like the mass numbers that we saw with the last virus. And so the point is that it's not exact science, but they made steady progress. But what the Biden administration did was just significant. It was the way that they've handled the virus in American history. Never been done better in terms of allocating resources to cure the condition. We've never seen anything like that before in this country. You know, starting back when they started the vaccination process in 1905, they've never paid for in-home testing and things like that. I was looking that up, and I never see that they've done that before. And that was a brilliant idea, whoever thought about that, quite frankly. Now, one final comment in closing today. One final comment first, Milton, any final thoughts for today for our audience?
Like I said, we're in a war, and it's not as much of a physical war as one expects when you say you're in a war, but we are in a war in dealing with keeping our values. And if we don't watch out, we're going to be going backwards in this country. Women are losing their rights before you know it. I mean, and Black folks are losing their rights. More of us are having criminal records and being taken out of the voting system, and hopefully making decisions that would help your family and making a living. So we got to keep fighting. We got to keep fighting, and we got to keep voting.
Attorney Banks? I think I lost her.
While a lot of our focus is at the federal level, that it's critical to understand that on a day-to-day basis, all politics are local. And so you have to know who your local officials are and understand exactly what their positions are on issues that impact your day-to-day life. And so what is their position on a woman's right, reproductive rights? For example, you have to know who is representing you, as the superintendent of schools. Your judges matter. We see that a Trump-appointed judge recently held this week that a special master should be appointed to review the 11,000 documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago. So again, it's very, very important for you to understand who you are electing to state and local offices, and whether or not they are actually representing your interest.
I like to thank each and every one of you for joining our show today. And like Attorney Banks, Attorney Grimes said, we urge each and every one of you, in a democracy, you must vote. In a democracy, if you get a summons to appear for jury duty, please show up. Please show up, and don't try to get out of it. We need you there on the battlefield. We're seeking justice and accountability in our courtroom, in our boardrooms, in our political arena. So thank you all. We'll talk to you next week. Until then, stay safe, and may God bless and keep you.